People prepared and ready to give the opening statement.
We have one moment, Rod. Yes, we do. First of all, I want to thank all of you. This has been a really long process for you as jurors. It started filling out the extremely lengthy questionnaire back in early January, and now here we are. Second. I don't know if we have product placement. What's going on here? It looks like a commercial.
That's the Elmo.
Should be okay. Should be fine. Thank you. All right, let's go with take two. So, I'm about to get up here and I'm going to give an opening statement that's going to lay out what we believe the evidence is going to show in this case. I'm not going to lie to you. It is not going to be short. It is going to be a lengthy presentation. And the reason it's going to be a lengthy presentation is there's a lot of information that I need to convey. And unfortunately, if I don't do my job and I don't present all the evidence that I have, then I can't really expect you to do yours. So I hope that you will be as patient as you can and that you will pay attention as closely as you can. I'll let you all in a secret. I myself do not know exactly how long it's going to be, other than it is very long. Mr. Milius, who's seated back there, this is primarily his creation. There's a lot of work that has gone into it, and I hope that it will help you better understand the information you're going to be seeing. Now, opening statement gives me an opportunity that I will not have at any time during the rest of this case. Our team, as much as we would like to present everything in a logical, chronological order during the trial, we just can't do it because we're dealing with the logistics of 100+ witnesses and trying to coordinate everybody. So this opening statement is going to be your opportunity to see the evidence in a logical and in a primarily chronological order. Unfortunately, this will probably be the only time. So again, as you're watching, remember that when the evidence is presented, it will likely not be presented in this order. So as you are all aware, this case involves what the people are going to present as 3 different homicide cases, and in fact, 3 different murders. The killing of Kathie Durst, the killing of Susan Berman, and the killing of Morris Black. So, I'm not going to start at the beginning. I'm going to start at the beginning of the case that you are here to decide, which is the murder of Susan Berman. December 24th, 2000, a little after 12 noon, the following 911 call was received by the Los Angeles Police Department, by their dispatch center.
LAPD operator 348.
Yes, hi. I live in Benedict Canyon, and my next door neighbor, one of our other neighbors, found her dog on the street yesterday. And
Was it dead or?
oh no, we have her. The problem is, they gave us the dog, and we went over next door to see if Susan was home, and her car's in the driveway. She's not answering her door. There are packages on our doorstep. She's not answering her phone. Her back door is wide open. So I don't know what's going on.
The door, it's open door. Y'all did not go inside.
Oh, no, we're not.
Okay.
No, we're not. We have, her other dogs are in her yard, and they're barking their little heads off, and she would not, I mean, our area, there are a lot of animals. Nobody leaves their dog out overnight, so it's very weird.
Okay, what's her address?
Actually, it's a good question. I can give you mine. She's next door. I'm not sure her number.
Yeah, what's your address?
1531 Benedict Canyon Drive.
I hope she's okay.
Me too. She lives by herself, and I hate to think.
Yeah. Is she elderly or?
Not particularly, but you never know. I mean, teenagers hit their head in the shower and get knocked out.
Yeah. And what was your name?
My name is Catherine Cutter, Cuttpr.
Okay, let's go ahead and get Thompson out there to take it out.
Thank you very much.
To your house and leave your direct, okay?
Okay, thanks. Bye.
So this case started off, like many cases do, with a very innocuous call. The kind of calls that 911 dispatchers get every day, which by and large end up with really nothing. Somebody is just not home, somebody has fallen, but as is their responsibility, the Los Angeles Police Department responded. Now, Susan lived in an area of Benedict Canyon, which has a Beverly Hills address. So it has Beverly Hills zip code and address, but it's actually a part of Los Angeles. So what does that mean? That means that Beverly Hills Police Department, they are not the responding units. They're not the people that patrol and have responsibility for the area. It's the Los Angeles Police Department. So about 30 minutes after the call, LAP officers arrive and they get to the location. What you will see is this is Susan's house. These are photographs that were taken the day that the officers responded. That's Susan's old Isuzu Trooper in the driveway. That is a police car, likely a detective vehicle. So the officers respond. And when they get here, this is kind of what they see. There's a car in the garage. They see the gate. And basically, it's a very small house. And as the evidence is going to show, it's kind of a rundown house. It's a rental. And Officer Rashad Sharif from Los Angeles Police Department, who's going to testify, he and fellow officers, they respond. And so what do? Well, they want to try to find out what's going on. Now again, they're going to tell you, Officer Sharif is going to tell you that when you respond to a call like this, the last thing you are expecting, this is a very low crime neighborhood, is to walk in on a homicide case. So again, officers always need to be ready, but they're not expecting to find what in fact they're going to see inside. So what happens is they go around to the back door. This is the back door of Susan's residence. There's a fence around it. And when they go to the back door is wide open. And there's going to be evidence that in fact Susan's dogs were running around. If you remember, the voice you heard on the 911 tape was Catherine Cutter, who is a neighbor of Susan's. And the neighbors were alerted when the dogs were running around. Benedict Canyon is a very busy street. It's kind of a shortcut to the valley. And people really drive fast in that area. It's not a place that you would want your dogs in any way loose. So officers, they go in. And when they go into the back bedroom, this is what they see. This is what they find. Susan is on the floor. She is dead. There's a small pool of blood around her head. She's not moving. She's cold to the touch. And they very quickly realize that in fact she is deceased. So right off the top, the officers look around and detectives aren't even there yet. And they're trying to figure out, what do we have here? Well, she's been shot. They can see that. They find a casing in the corner.
Excuse me, Your Honor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I believe that what's on the screen now, the motive for the murder was not robbery or murder, is argument. That's not a statement of what the evidence will show.
Ladies and gentlemen, the opening statement is not meant to be taken as an argument. This is a description by the lawyers for each side during their opening statement of what they expect that the evidence will show. You may continue.
So the evidence will show, absolutely and unequivocally, that the motive for Susan's murder was not robbery or burglary. So the officers come in and what do they see? Well, there's no forced entry that they can find. They go inside and they notice that the windows, they're locked, they're unbroken. The back door is wide open. When they go inside, they don't see any signs of ransacking in the house. They don't see any sign of a struggle. They don't see any evidence that anything has been taken. And in fact, Susan's purse with credit cards, her ID, and cash is sitting on the kitchen counter. the evidence is going to show, without question, that Susan knew her killer.
Again, Your Honor, this is argument rather than statement of the evidence.
The objection is overruled. You may continue, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Your Honor. The evidence is going to show, again, without question, that Susan knew her killer and that she freely and voluntarily admitted this person into her house. Now, Susan, you're going to hear a lot about her, is somewhat of a paranoid woman. She is the kind of person who, you're going to hear testimony, would never have opened her door to a stranger. You're going to further have evidence that at the time Susan was shot, her back was to the killer. So the evidence will show that she let the killer into the house, she turned her back to them. The evidence will show, demonstrating that she was unafraid, she wasn't scared, she didn't know what was going to happen, and then she was executed. Shot in the back of the head at very close range. Thankfully, she did not see it coming. Now, we know that the killer wanted Susan's body to be found. And this is incredibly important evidence. How do we know that? Well, the evidence is going to show that this letter, which has commonly been referred to as the cadaver note, was mailed to the Beverly Hills Police Department prior to Susan's body being found. So meaning that there will be a postmark from the 23rd, and her body is not going to be found until the 24th. So inside the envelope was this cryptic note, and all it says is 1527 Benedict Canyon, and it has the word cadaver. Now, cadaver is a very interesting term. It's not a term that you're going to find and that you've probably seen in your own lives that a lot of people use generally. There are people that use it. The evidence is going to show that when someone goes to medical school, they are literally given a cadaver. That happens generally in your first year of medical school. And that is what you work on. That's how you learn anatomy. And the evidence will show that Bob Durst's wife, Kathie, had been in medical school while she was married to Bob Durst. That is why that word was used.
Well, that's argument, Your Honor. That clearly is argument.
So, actually, let me sustain that objection, and I'm going to reconsider. As far as the point about Susan knowing her killer, that's actually an inference that one can draw from the evidence, and I think there's a difference between facts and inferences. And when you draw an inference, the inference that you draw is, the lawyers will argue to you the inference you should draw from a fact. So I will sustain the objection and just remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that what the attorneys say is not evidence, it's their impressions of their outline of what the evidence will show. It's what they expect the evidence will show during the trial. They do not treat the statements of counsel as evidence.
And would you instruct the jury to disregard that last argument of Mr.
Mr. Loon, you may continue
Thank you.
to present your opening statement.
So you're going to hear evidence from Kathie's medical school classmates, a number of them. And they're going to explain to you that, in fact, in their first year of medical school, that they worked on cadavers, that that's how they were referred to, and that it was common within the medical community to refer to these people who volunteered their bodies after death, to refer to them as cadavers. So inside, we have this address and we have that note. 1527 Benedict Canyon is Susan's address. In order to really understand this story, in order to understand exactly what happened, in order to be able to figure out how it was that this murder of Susan Berman happened, we have to go all the way back. And we have to talk about who is Robert Durst. Now, Robert Durst is the son of Seymour Durst. Seymour Durst was a second-generation Manhattan real estate developer. Seymour's father, Joseph Durst, started the company, and each successive generation expanded it. At the time that the killing of Kathie Durst occurred in 1982, the Durst organization was one of the largest privately owned real estate conglomerates in New York City. Durst was born in 1943. He was the oldest of 4 children. That's him in the back. He was followed by his younger brother Douglas, who's in the middle, his sister Wendy off to the right, and Tommy, the youngest. You're going to hear from Douglas Durst, and you're going to hear from Thomas Durst. They're going to testify at this trial. In 1965, after Durst graduated from Lehigh, a small college in Pennsylvania, he came out to LA allegedly to attend graduate school at UCLA. In fact, he spent his time out here smoking marijuana, going to screen therapy with John Lennon, and dodging the draft. Those are his words, not mine. Durst often claims to have a master's degree from UCLA. That is untrue. Now,
excuse me, objection. On the screen now is a statement that Durst believes the rules don't apply to him. That is clearly argument.
Your Honor, that is the evidence that will be presented.
Did he make such a statement?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh.
So, in order to understand these 3 homicides, why they occurred and how they occurred, one of the things you have to understand is who Bob Durst is and his view of what rules apply to him and what rules don't. That's going to become important as the evidence comes out, because you're going to see in the way that these crimes were committed, in the way they were covered up, that Mr. Durst makes clear explicitly that in essence, I can do whatever I want. So, this is Mr. Durst, and you're going to see a series of interviews, which I'm going to get into more detail later. Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling conducted interviews of Mr. Durst in December of 2010. They did that over a series of 3 days. During those 3 days, Mr. Durst is wearing that same sweater and the same shirt. They do that because then they can mix things around. So you can't tell by just looking whether this occurred on December 11th, December 12th, or December 13th. But this is Mr. Durst, and this is him discussing the very point that I just made.
Oh, yes. When I was in college, I went into Vista for a year after college, and we would help people get food stamps and like that. Well, if they can get them, why can't I get them? All you have to do is show them a bank account with zilch in it and sign a bunch of papers saying you don't got nothing, and I would get food stamps. And I got a big kick out of using food stamps.
Which part did you get a kick out of? The going into a store?
Yeah, I'm getting away with this. I'm beating the government. Not that long ago, the airport, I've gotten off the plane, I'm getting ready to leave, and I want to get water. I'm going to get a bottle of water, and the line goes down there. So I just took the bottle of water and left. That was shoplifting.
Nobody chased you down?
Yeah, there was one little lady there and 50 people waiting to buy whatever it was. Well, you know those things in the airport. They charge you 3 times what it would cost any place else.
Mr. Durst repeated and discussed this same issue during the interview that myself and investigators had with him in New Orleans after his arrest in 2015.
We also talk about being in an airport and just taking water, a thing of water. And you're like, I wasn't gonna wait in line. I mean, they're asking $3 for a thing of water.
There's the waiting in line. I'm at the airport now, and it's 20 feet to the cashier. Fuck it, I'm gonna take the water and leave.
The reason that people don't, we're taught, hey, you can't steal, or you have to follow this rule.
I didn't have to follow the rule.
Yeah,
Here's the line, you get to the end of the line, think I'm not gonna get at the end of the line, I've got other things I wanna do.
Now, so do you think that the way you were raised, your family, the money, is that what kind of created that part of you?
Well, my siblings are not like that.
So, Bob Durst is very honest about the fact that the rules don't apply to him. You're going to hear him discuss in these interviews that this isn't because of the way he was raised. His siblings aren't like that. It's just who he is. And that idea, that way of operating in life dictated how Bob Durst not just treated people, how he got rid of them when they were problematic, and how he chose to cover up his misdeeds after they had occurred.
It's a clearly argument, Your Honor.
I agree.
Concluded to be-
Mr. Lewin, don't argue in the opening statement. You may present your evidence. I'm giving you quite a bit of leeway to preview evidence. You may do that. You may continue.
And would you instruct the jury to disregard that?
Yes,
argument?
disregard arguments during the opening statement. It's not the time for them. You may continue presenting your opening statement,
Yes.
Mr. Lewin.
The evidence will also show that Mr. Durst was very cognizant of certain personality quirks and how he could utilize them to his advantage. He discussed his burping and how he utilized that in situations to assume a certain level of control.
And I remember Jim saying to me at some point that, you would burp in public.
Oh,
Think about
yes,
it.
yes,
Tell me
yes.
about that.
I would burp in public. I got used to it in college. And I just kept burping in public. And I'm amazed that my father never said, Bob, but he couldn't say to me, you can't come in if you're going to keep coming into the, it's terrible, it's embarrassing. And burping loudly, belching, he said. You don't burp, you belch. Or maybe that was my sister who first came up with that. He belches. And I kind of liked it in the business because it made it very clear to everybody that I wasn't going to follow the simplest of the rules. Forget about taking the thing seriously.
And was it, did you enjoy the idea that you'd be in a meeting and would disrupt
Yes,
the
I
meeting?
did enjoy it.
Tell me in a full sentence.
Well, I would be in a meeting and I would be trying to impress upon everybody, and I thought it was a complete waste of time and silly, and I would let out a big belch. No apology, no I'm sorry, no nothing. Just, keep going.
But you knew you were doing it.
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Durst expanded upon that in the interview and made very clear that this was something intentional that he had control over.
Was there anything that happened that made you aware of that? Oh, right, I gotta tone this down.
Oh, I became aware, when I was in the business, there was nothing they could do if I did it, because what are they going to do? Fire me, which would have been all right with me. But when I left the company and I was out doing stuff, I right away realized, you're not Robert Durst, the Durst organization anymore. You're going to have to tone these things down. And I stopped belching. And I kept talking to myself. That went on. But I made the belching go away, and I wouldn't be totally impolite to people. I would swear in the meetings, and I would use bad words and enjoy it, and I saw a reaction.
Did your dad ever put his foot down? Did he ever say, okay?
No, yes, he put his foot down. Stop doing that. You can't keep doing that. He would take me aside and he was like, you can't keep doing that. Just stop the belching. Stop talking to these people like they're the maid. You can't do that. I talk to the maids much better than I spoke to the businessy people. But the next step was to say, you can't come in anymore. You're fired. That's just what he did not want, but he wanted me to change and to keep working there.
So it was in some ways a means of protest.
Rebellion.
But
I can do what I want. There's nothing anybody can do about it. Tough.
The other theme that would drive Mr. Durst going forward into life was also the idea that he was very tight with money. This is something that not only will he admit, but which will be confirmed by others, and which will play a role in why Susan Berman was eventually murdered. You're going to hear from Douglas Durst, who is the defendant's younger brother, who is now the head of the Durst organization. It is a very troubled relationship for many, many years. Douglas Durst is going to come in and testify, and one of the things he's going to tell you that his brother, Bob, has always been very tight with money.
I guess one thing that's extremely tight with a dollar. Where he had an old Volkswagen Bug that he sold, and he spent hours rewinding the odometer with a hand tool.
Now, Mr. Durst is going to admit this behavior. He's going to acknowledge his cheapness.
I was cheap. I don't know where I got it from. Seymour was cheap with himself. He would spend a fortune buying tenements, but he was cheap with himself and his lifestyle. And I must have inherited that from him. My little brother Tommy was like that to some extent. Not as extremely as me, but to some extent. Douglas and Wendy were the other way. We got all this money, let's spend it.
Now, while at UCLA in the mid-'60s, that's when Bob Durst met Susan Berman. And they became very close, really best friends, and she became his confidant. It was never a romantic relationship. They were just very close friends as they shared certain things in common. They had a mutual kind of best friend, Nick Chavin. Nick Chavin is going to be a very important witness in this case. You're going to see him testify. And Nick Chavin is going to talk about the closeness of the relationship that Bob and Susan had in particular. And that amongst the three, even though they were all three very close to each other, the defendant and Susan Berman were the closest.
If I were to ask you to describe the relationship between Bob and Susan Berman, how would you characterize it?
As long-term best friends. I mean, they went back to UCLA, their friendship.
Would Bob Durst ever tell you anything about how he felt about Susan?
Just that they were very close. I mean, we would laugh about her eccentricities and such, but they were very, very close.
And with what you saw, did you believe that those feelings were reciprocated?
Yes. Susan often told me the same thing.
And when you said Susan would tell you the same thing, what would Susan tell you?
How much she loved Bobby.
Given the closeness of Bob and Kathie's relationship, I'm sorry, Bob and Susan's relationship,
Is there anything that you can think of that Susan would not have done for Bob?
No.
Lorraine Newman was another close friend of Susan Berman's. And Lorraine is also going to come in and testify. And she is also going to describe the closeness of Bob Durst's relationship with Susan.
Or times. If I were to ask you, hey Lorraine, who was Susan closest to? Or who would she talk about the most? Who would that have been?
It was Bobby.
And let me ask you, in terms of the way she would talk about him, if I were to say, hey, describe the relationship as you knew it to be. From
They were
Susan.
very, very close. They were best friends.
Your Honor, may I inquire? I don't believe this is sworn testimony. This is simply an interview. I don't think that's a recording. This is what's on the screen is just a still photograph. So what was played for the jury was a recording of an interview that Mr. Lewin did. That's not admissible evidence.
You know, the objection is sustained. You may describe what a witness may say. You may quote what the witness will say. In fact, if it is an exhibit that I've already read this, folks, but you may, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, but you may reiterate what this witness will say.
Well, may we be heard at sidebar, please?
You may be heard at the break.
One of the things that is going to become very clear in this case, what the evidence is going to show, is that much of the most damaging evidence is going to come directly from Mr. Durst himself, out of his own mouth. What the evidence is going to show is that in many ways, Mr. Durst will admit to things that most people would never admit to. He will concede things that most people would deny. However, the evidence will also show that although Mr. Durst will admit things that most of us would never, ever agree to, he's also careful that oftentimes there's 5% that you do not hear. That's what the evidence will demonstrate in this case. Now, with respect to the closeness of his relationship, Mr. Durst is going to concede that he and Susan were very close, as he did during the 2015 interview in New Orleans jail shortly after his arrest.
You said Susan was your best friend, right? I mean, yeah? No?
Yes.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Susan was probably closer to me. The 2 years of my life, Kathie was my best friend.
Right.
But other than that, Susan was my best friend.
And Susan was a very loyal person, would you agree?
Absolutely.
Now, during the same interview, the defendant himself made clear that Susan would go to almost any length to protect him.
The people closest to Susan, everybody says, even Sarah, that if in that situation, maybe a little bit because of her dad, the whole, mafia thing, that they think that she would have done anything for you.
Damn close.
So let's talk for a moment about Susan Berman and who she was. So Susan Berman was the only child of Gladys and David Berman. That's going to be Susan. This is a picture from the early 50s. That's her dad, David, and that was her mom, Gladys, on the right. Now, Susan's father, Davy, was known as Davy the Jew Berman, and he was a notorious gangster, and he actually replaced Bugsy Siegel running the Flamingo after Bugsy Siegel was killed by New York mobsters in, I think, approximately 1950. And so Susan grew up in Las Vegas, and she was kind of like the princess of Las Vegas. Liberace would play at her birthday party. She hung out at the casino, and she was very close to her father. Now, Davy Berman was also a founding member of Murder Incorporated. And this was a crime organization that was responsible for many contract murders in the 30s and 40s. So Susan grew up with a father who was one thing to her, but a completely another thing in his daily life and activities. And the evidence is going to show that she was drawn to Bob Durst for some of those same reasons. Now, Susan absolutely romanticized her relationship with her father. Unfortunately, by the time Susan was 12 years old, both her parents were gone. Her father died during a surgery, and her mother ended up institutionalized and dying when Susan was very young as well. So as a result of Susan's upbringing, Susan maintained a strict code of honor and was incredibly loyal to her friends. Gary, at this point, this is why I need to have the sidebar report.
Very well. We'll